Okay, one thing that I didn't think that we talked about last time enough of was the cabin itself.
Welcome back to Straight Up Book Club. Today we're talking about this book back here. So, The House in the Pines by Ana Reyes. I think it's Ana, just the way it's spelled. But if I'm wrong, please let me know. Um, yeah, so we're talking about the second part of this book. We finished it pretty fast. It was quite a
Yeah.
fun read, right? Even that second part. So I'm excited to chat about it. But before we get into it, Heather, how's your week?
It was great. It was a lot of fun. I went to another concert because I am addicted, I guess. But I went to the midnight on Wednesday. It was like the midnight in Chromeo, which is from Chromeo's from Montreal. I didn't know them as well, but they put on a really good show. Apparently, they've been around for like 20 years,
Hmm.
and yeah, I had a lot of fun. But I'm definitely like I need to stop on the weeknight concerts because it's a lot to like go to work the next day. How was your week, Nat?
That sounds so fun, but I agree with you. It's like those late nights, you're like the next day, you're like, oh, like
Not
I wish
24
it had
anymore.
been a Friday. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was good. You know, nothing too exciting. Just like life stuff happening. So I don't everything's been good. I don't think I have a lot to say actually. Like my week has been pretty boring.
Did you drink anything fun?
Did I drink anything fun? I've been drinking a lot of like white wine, so I would
I'm
say
so
not
into
really.
that.
But oh my gosh, my answer is so boring, Heather.
No,
But
white wine
my
is great.
white wine's great. It's easy drinking for sure. Um, no, what I've stopped doing is like, pairing the books with a type of alcohol, which like, or a cocktail or whatever, which I need to get back to again because I feel like this last book would have been great for like, I don't know, like a smoky cocktail, like, something really whiskey based, a little bit of a scotch based cocktail would have been good for this one. Especially with like the last one we were talking about, the last episode we were talking about that sort of like mystic feel, like that,
Mhm.
not nightmare, but like dreamlike quality. So yeah, looking back, maybe that should have been what my week was about, but
Well, there's
regrets.
lots of October left, so you can read another spooky book. And then if I can make a suggestion, it's actually what you and I had when we were at the Caledonian that night. And it's like a gin martini, but you do like a scotch wash, like get like a really nice peaty scotch and kind of like
Mm.
instead of vermouth, put it in the glass, swish it around so you get that like nice bit of smokiness, and then pour the martini in it. If you have lemon, do a lemon zest. I didn't, so I didn't have any garnish. But I did have that this week and it was so good. So I would definitely recommend that for this month with like a little thriller or suspense book.
Ooh, that sounds really good. Okay, I'll have to do that.
Yeah. And when you come visit, I'll make one for you.
Sounds great.
Okay, let's get into it. So, last time we left off, and I had said that we were probably like so we have our two timelines, the one where Aubrey dies, and then the current timeline where Maya's trying to figure out what's going on with Frank. So, I'll go through the Aubrey timeline first. Last time I was like, oh, she must die in this moment because she's in the red dress. I was totally mistaken. She didn't die in a red dress, and I don't know why I had created this false memory. But we still have more time with Aubrey, and essentially Maya leaves Frank and patches things up with her, and they start to open up to each other about everything like Maya went through, and she finds out that Aubrey actually kind of had like a similar experience. Maya tells her about the cabin and how the next when she got home she was covered in mud on like her knees and her hands, so she knew something like really weird had happened, and Aubrey believes her, which Maya's really relieved by, and Aubrey believes her because she says she was having some moments of lost time with Frank as well. And she actually brings up the time that they were at the Dunkin' Donuts when Maya had walked in on them and had gotten really furious because she thought that they were on a date. But Maya says that over an hour had passed when they were there, when she felt like she'd only been there for a couple of minutes. Um, and they kind of have this conversation about him. One day they're doing dishes at the house, and Maya's mom is like, okay, I'm gonna go for a run. and she leaves the door, like I guess just like the screen door open. Like also I feel like that's a very like 90s thing. Like do those even exist anymore? Like I had a screen door and then a door. And so in my head it's like the real door was open and the screen door was closed so you can kind of see into the house. So
It's
they're washing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
it's it's funny because like like I've been looking at places, we're in the process of moving, but when we were looking at places, like we saw this one listing that had one of those like cottage doors. Like it makes me think of like Little Red Riding Hood or something, where
Yeah.
like the top half opens, and I was like, you never see this anymore. It's like, and the realtor was like, you could just, keep the bottom half closed and open the top half. And I was like,
Oh,
what do you mean? There's no screen. Who
that's
did
insane. Even
someone
with
could
a
just reach into
screen.
my house?
Like I look back on the door because like my childhood home had a screen door and like there was the little tiny lock and you just went like boop, and that locked it. Anyone could
Mhm.
take a knife and just like slash that screen, put their arm through it. Like how did we just close that door and feel like it was fine? I don't know. I would never. I
Yeah.
would never. And there's reason to believe this because Frank shows up and obviously Aubrey and Maya are getting like really afraid of him. Maya runs upstairs because she needs to grab her phone to call 911. When she comes downstairs, she sees that like Aubrey has left the front door, is talking to Frank. They're being very calm, but then all of a sudden, Aubrey just collapses. Maya runs to her and she dies. Maya's mom kind of appears at this point. She's trying to save her. It doesn't happen, and Aubrey is dead. The next thing we see in this timeline is Aubrey, sorry, not Aubrey. Maya is talking to the detective. Detective, was it Diaz? Or is that the current one?
It was, yeah, it was Diaz. The second one was
Diaz.
Diaz. The original one, the original, but the one with Aubrey with no. Okay, so yeah, with Aubrey, it is Detective Donnelly.
Donnelly, right. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. So she's with Detective Donnelly, and Detective Donnelly does not believe her when she says that it was Frank that he killed her. He's very adamant that, Maya, you're unwell. You need to see a doctor. You probably need like psychiatric help. And that is how we end here. And that's kind of how I think we get the notion that Maya was probably put on the Klonopin around that time. Her mom also believes that she needed psychiatric help. To be fair, her Aunt Lisa had periods of psychosis, so I think they just kind of chalked it up to that, and that Aubrey's death was considered sudden, unexpected death, which is just a
Mhm.
ruling that you give someone when someone dies suddenly and you don't really have a cause or a reason for it. Okay, so that's that timeline. Now, in this timeline, Maya is out to get Frank. She's like, I know that he did this. I know that he killed Aubrey. I know that he killed Christina, and I know that he killed Ruby, his ex. So she's like, I'm gonna find him. And she tracks him down and finds out that he goes to the Whistling Pig every single night, which is a little bar. And she has this like plan concocted. She writes a note to her mom. I thought this was really clever. She writes a note that says, Mom, if you see this, I'm in trouble. Come get me at the
Mhm.
Whistling Pig. And she puts it on like one of those old-fashioned alarms that kind of like, I guess, or I guess I imagine it was an old-fashioned alarm, any kind of alarm. She sets the alarm to midnight and so she and then puts the note on top of it. So if the alarm goes on off, her mom would go upstairs and find it. In my head, I was like, the note has to fall to the floor on top of this jiggling alarm. I don't know why I had concocted that in my mind as I was saying it. I'm like, that's not necessary. Her mom just needs to hear this.
It's so
Anyway,
funny because like I feel like you pick up on these like real like you do like a very close reading and you pick up on such details, and it's like so great to see. Because for me, like I hadn't even like picked up on that part of it. So I was sort of like I was thinking, okay, like so how is she making sure that her mom is like getting to this? And in my head, I was like, oh, okay, because she knows her shift is gonna be over and then she's gonna come home and she's gonna come look for her and she's gonna
oh.
find the so I didn't even like pick up on the alarm clock. That's so funny. I just like completely glazed over it.
I
I
feel
need
like
to
you
start
will
looking at
often
the
point
details.
out, I feel like you point out like big plot pieces though that I'm like, oh, that went over my head. Like I feel like I miss large portions. I can't remember what it was that we read recently. What was it? Oh, it was Long Island Compromise, and you were like, what's his name? Had like done the kidnapping. I was like, he did?
Oh yeah.
So clearly. You're
filling
better at
gaps for
like the
each other.
biggest. Yeah, exactly. We're just here to help each other out. That's why you need multiple people at a book club. Can't be a
Yep.
book club of one because you miss stuff. So yeah, so her mom like obviously gets this. Um, Meanwhile, at the Whistling Pig, Maya has found Frank. They sit down, they're talking, and obviously Frank gets her into this like trance. During this trance, he says, Christina, she wanted to die. She wanted to go live in the cabin with me, which we all know is false. Like the cabin is completely his like hypnosis. I forgot something important. The reason that she goes to Frank and she knows that he's putting her under this like hypnotic spell is because she finds out through her research that his father was a psychologist who practiced hypnotism on people, and he lost his license when somebody died when they were under hypnotism. So she's kind of put two and two together and she knows now what's going on. So they're at the Whistling Pig. He's got her in a trance, essentially admits that he killed Christina the whole time she's recording this on her phone in her purse. Her mom shows up, saves her, brings her to a new detective, Detective Diaz, who believes her. She listens to the voice recording and she's like, this is very, sus. And she builds a case against Frank. Maya gets a restraining order against him. Dan was fine in the end. They patch things up. She patches things up with his parents. And Maya ends up becoming a writer like her father. She at least like starts becoming a writer like her father was, and that's kind of where we end. And I don't know if I missed anything, but
Yeah,
that's
I think you got everything. Um, okay, so it's so interesting because there was like this big shift um into where we start to understand that hypnosis is, at play here. And I'm really curious, like at what point did you start to notice or sort of pick up on that? Because I feel like we had clues throughout, but it wasn't like really, I would say even like halfway through this half that we really understand that it's like that hypnosis piece. So I'm just curious, but I feel like I was starting to have an inkling pretty early on in this
I wasn't. See, and this is where you get the things that I don't. I did not think it was hypnotism. I thought it was magic until the moment when Maya was reading that letter or whatever it was, and she like couldn't read the word hypnotist. She
half.
kept like stumbling over this word, and then it was like becoming clear what it was, and I was like, "Oh, this is all hypnotism." Like I literally didn't put two and two together until the author did the full like reveal. That was the first time I thought. I literally thought it was like a spell or something before that. Sorry, my nose is running.
Yeah, because that was a red herring, right? Like they
Yes.
did mention the part about magic quite a bit.
Hmm.
So that was the other theory for sure. And I actually like I'm glad you brought up the part about her not being able to read those words. And there's also a moment where she can't hear something, right? And she
Hmm.
has to like play it over and over again. Um, I haven't encountered that in relation to hypnosis before, right? Like that's not a concept that I attach to hypnosis, that you just can't see a word or can't hear a word, or just like that concept is just not familiar to you or available to you. And it's a cool plot device. But it definitely like brings us away from like reality a little bit, because like I mean there are some levels of um hypnotic states, like hypnotic trance states that you can achieve. Like, I don't think to this level for sure, but
Yeah.
so like it's kind of cool to like kind of add this level of um, not mysticism, but like fantasy in this way.
Yeah. And to me, I'm curious to know what you think about hypnotism in general. Because I know like some people use it to treat like for instance, and I think they even brought it up in the book, like smoking. Like they'll help people quit smoking. So it's almost like even though the hypnotic state when you're with the hypnotist is only, maybe it's a half an hour or whatever, there are certain things that will stay with you after. So like from now on, a cigarette will always taste like trash. So I almost wondered if like the inability to register the term hypnotism was a part of his hypnosis. Like, did he say like, you're as a way to keep her from realizing what it was? Like, did he say in his sessions, you know, the word hypnotism will never be clear to you or something like that? I don't know. Like, to me, that was maybe a part of it. But I'm also
Hmm.
curious to know what your thoughts are on hypnotism in general. Like, do you think it's like a little bit of a pseudoscience? Do you believe in its effects? Do you think that if you do you think that you would be susceptible to hypnotism? I'm very curious.
Well, they do say in this book, people who are more, um, creative, who are more sort of drawn into books and, works of art are more susceptible to it. So with that, maybe we are you as well. I'm lumping you in there. But in general, um, I mean, I do think it's a pseudoscience. I'm really skeptical of, is it fringe science or, that sort of area that doesn't have um too much backing it. I mean, I might be completely wrong. Who knows? But like, with sort of things like this, I do definitely start tend to lead with skepticism, Um, in terms of sort of entertainment, I feel like when I was a kid, there are all these like shows and stuff where,
Hmm.
it was always like a caricature of hypnosis, right? Where it's almost like you'd have the host like get volunteers and make them like look like a chicken or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like it's all like to me, it's always been associated with stuff like that. But then I have heard about people using it as a tool to like quit smoking and things like that. That I guess I don't really understand.
Hmm.
I do get that you can train your brain a certain way. I just don't know if I believe that there's a shortcut like this, you
Hmm.
know? I mean, if people are super susceptible, that's great. Like that's a great hack, you know?
Yeah, I wonder, a part of me wonders if it's a lot of the just like the power of belief and like it
Hmm.
reminds me of George Costanza and his line, like, it's not a lie if you believe it. And I wonder if some people are so susceptible to believing things that if they just tell themselves, like, I'm going to be hypnotized to think that cigarettes taste like trash. And then if you tell yourself that and you really truly believe it enough, like maybe you do just kind of make that association and it's less the hypnotism and more of just like the belief yourself. I'm not sure. But I'm definitely terrified of it. I would never allow someone to hypnotize me because what if it did work?
Oh yeah, me too. I'm like, I don't believe it, but I'm also not gonna do
Not going
it
near
just
it.
in case.
No, I don't even want to be in the same room as someone being hypnotized. That's scary.
Yeah, but your point, that brings up, then, there's something like The Secret and things like that, where it's like, if you believe something, like enough, it'll happen. If you really believe you want a parking space, or you'll have that parking space and you visualize it, the world will give you a parking space. I'm like definitely skeptical of things like that also. But then there's the aspect of like manifesting and sort of
Hmm.
like believing in a version of yourself and then allowing yourself to grow into that version that I do believe, right? Like,
Hmm.
I mean, I
Yes.
think, I think you can sort of, I think there is power in you thinking of yourself a certain way because if you think of yourself as really small and your life is, very small, then you'll always live that way. But then if
Hmm.
you allow yourself to sort of expand, you'll kind of grow to fill that space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's also just like you you're going to notice the things that you're looking for, if that makes sense. So like the parking space one is kind of a like you're not necessarily going to find a parking space by believing in it, but if you tell yourself that you're manifesting a parking space and then you find one, you're going to believe that it was like you who concocted this. I saw
Hmm.
like a clip recently, I think it was from another podcast, and this guy had said, I want you to close your eyes right now. Or sorry, sorry, let me start over. This guy said, look around the room and I want you to point out everything that's brown, like just in your head, like look at all the things that are brown. Now close your eyes. Tell me everything that's red. And the
Hmm.
guy's like, "Oh shit." He's like, "I can't think of anything." And when he opens his eyes, he's like, "There's tons of red things here. You just like weren't looking for them." And your mind is
Hmm.
very susceptible to seeing the things that you're expecting to see. So I do think that that plays in our day-to-day a lot for sure.
Yeah, it's like confirmation bias.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
do you remember that show? What is the one with this like comedian who's like going around New York and he has like little clips and he always has a story. It was on HBO recently. Why am I blanking
Was
on
it
this
like a
name?
drama or a comedy?
No, it's like a doc kind of.
I don't know.
I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of this. But anyway, so he has like a series of montages, and it's very similar where he like goes around and he like asks New Yorkers, like, is there anything that you think you see all the time? And someone's like, yeah, I see wigs all the time. Everywhere I go, I see wigs. And he starts looking for these wigs, and there's like wigs in the street, things like that. And it's just like this person is very aware that they're seeing wigs.
Hmm.
And so confirmation bias, you start to see and notice that more and more. And I think like some of the other people said different things for sure. But it's to your point, if you're looking for the thing that's brown, you're gonna block everything else out.
Hmm.
So there might be the same number of brown and red things. It's just that you're looking out for one more than the other.
That's kind of why I like this. It's newer. I don't want, I guess I'll call it a phenomenon, but like the lucky girl phenomenon. It's like it seemed like a cultish thing on TikTok for a little while where it's like we are lucky girls. But I started like kind of joking about that, like I'm a lucky girl and like this is why this is happening. And like you do start to see when you're looking for it, like it does show itself. And I know there's like an amount of privilege that comes from this kind of dialogue where it's like, I think beyond needing to survive when you're, living your day to day in a like fairly privileged life and you're looking for the lucky things, like they're gonna show up. So I don't
Hmm.
know. I'm a little skeptical about that kind of stuff, and I do think there's a lot of like erroneous things within it, but at the same time, there is something to be said about like when you're looking for things, you're going to find them. If you feel
Yeah.
like if you tell yourself that you're really unlucky and everything bad happens to you, you're gonna see all the bad things that happen. Just like I think we talked about this before, but like my mom believes in like bad things happening in threes. So when like, two bad things happen, you're looking for that third thing. You're always on the lookout for it. And like you're gonna see them pop up. Or if that first thing happens, you're gonna be looking for number two and number three. So
Yeah.
it's definitely like an interesting study to do on humans, like how we really do find evidence in what we're looking for. Anyway, sorry, we could talk about
100%.
this part all day.
I know. I feel like we got a little bit like away from hypnosis, but I guess like it ties back in the way like maybe there's parts of it that make sense, but as a whole, if we're talking about hypnosis as like how it's presented in this book, of course, like leading with
Mhm.
skepticism on my end here, at least.
For sure. Let's talk about the key. So that was interesting. We kind of like brought it up last time. We weren't really sure what that was. And we found out that the key was sort of this thing to trigger hypnotism in people. And apparently this is like a tactic that hypnotists use where they're like, every time you see this item, this is going to help you like go to that place, that state. And for
Hmm.
Frank, his was the key, and that always helped people get to the cabin. The thing with Christina, which was the last person who died, is that she had the key tattooed on her arm. So clearly this was like a thing that she wanted to be able to look to at any time. And in Maya's conversation with Frank, it sounds like Christina really struggled with depression and that she wanted that escapism. So I'm just curious to know what you thought about, do you think that Christina tattooing the key on her represented her, desire to like live with Frank and be with him forever, or as more of a desire to like escape her reality? I don't know. I'm just really curious to know what you think about her permanent trigger, I guess. I'm not sure what other word to use for it.
That's a great point. I agree. I think it is about the escapism and wanting it to be permanent because, yeah, because he's not going to give her the key. She's not going to be able to just kind of hold on to it like that. Um, it does sound like it's less about Frank because when we kind of, was it Steven who's her friend, who's the
Mm-hmm.
security guard, and we like kind of get a bit more from him, like it does sound like, um, she was doing better for a little bit till she met Frank. And then maybe
Mm-hmm.
at that point, there was something that triggered for her that made her, made things harder for her again. So I think like maybe that's the connection there. Um, I do think like this part like started to lose me a little bit because, you know, so far, like if in this sort of world, um, the object is the physical key. So the
Mm,
association he's built is with the physical object. It's not like suddenly you see a picture of that object and you
yeah.
have, like that starts to be a bit of a stretch for me. So
Hmm.
even with the tattoo, it's like, can it really work like that? Because then um why isn't he just creating photocopies of this and handing this out to all his victims, I guess, you know?
Hmm.
I don't know why I did air quotes there, victims.
No, that's
But
true. Although for some reason I'm having like a memory of watching another show about hypnotism and the person like being able to show pictures and people being like, "Oh, but that was a little bit different." It was more like the cigarettes thing where it was like, "You're grossed out by this now," and then it was showing like different. And I'm blanking on what it even was, so maybe I'm creating something in my head that didn't exist. But yeah, I agree. Like you would think it would just be this one key, right? Like
yeah,
is a
yeah,
tattoo really going to bring her there? I'm not sure, but I mean,
yeah.
whether it did or didn't, I think it signified like her desire to escape to Frank's cabin. Like it seems like she was the one person who like really wanted to keep going there, whereas Maya and we didn't really get a lot about Ruby, like maybe they didn't as much.
Yeah, I'm so curious to hear your thoughts on that too, because I was like, we didn't get anything really on Ruby,
No.
right? We just know that, she was maybe the first person or,
Hmm.
you know, and when Maya kind of broaches that subject, he gets really like he will not go there. So like it's just kind of I felt like I missed that part. Like I wanted to know
Hmm.
more about what happened initially. Because that could also give us more insight into his character, maybe a little bit more. I know we have, the backstory with him and his father, but I really wanted to know what happened with Ruby or who she was to him and all of that. So that part was, unless I missed something, was there more?
I didn't get any more than you did. And it's interesting, like it almost feels like there's another story there that we aren't getting because of how angry he got when Maya brought it up. Like it was almost like maybe that was like a mistake in his hypnotism, like his her first attempt and she ended up dying and he didn't mean to kill her. Was it his
Mhm.
father? Like was his father somehow related to that? Because we know that his father was a hypnotist. And you had mentioned in your notes too, which I thought was really interesting, that when Maya goes and shows up at the house and his dad kind of smiles a little knowingly when she talks about the cabin, like his dad knows what's happening and
Mhm.
he accepts it. He relishes in it if he's like kind of laughing in a way at Maya as she's coming there. So I don't know, I definitely wonder if there's like a bit of a story there with Ruby that like didn't make it into the final edit. I'm not sure, but it
Yeah.
definitely feels like there's something there that's a little bit triggering for Frank if he's like if he's finding joy in Maya's demise and in Christina's demise, like saying things like, "Oh, Christina wanted it. Christina wanted it." And Aubrey, she had like he was very okay with being like, "Oh, Aubrey had to die because she knew too much." Like he was very overt about that. So the fact that he
Hmm.
doesn't want to talk to about Ruby sounds like there was a real love there and something happened and he's upset about it. I don't know. There's something that we're not getting.
Yeah, I was like, if this was a movie or a show, like this is a sequel,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. I almost
where we
want
get
like
that
a
backstory.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Uh, as you were talking about that, I realized, Heather, is this another theme of domestic violence? Another book that kind of
It is.
not, yeah, right? Like it's because there's that moment with him and his wife, right? And he's like kind of like it's mind control, it's kind of
Hmm.
um she isn't consenting to this. She doesn't, I don't know if she's aware that this is happening to her. So yeah, this is coming up a lot in books. This is just
Hmm.
like explored quite a bit in a few different ways actually, like which is um I'm glad to see like the full spectrum of ways that people can
Hmm.
hurt people is being explored.
It's so true. I mean, this one's very much into the like emotional manipulation. I mean, he also kills these women too, so there is like the most extreme form of violence, and there's the like very internal one too, which is like the emotional manipulation, gaslighting. Like I feel like this is a very interesting version of gaslighting where you're using a tool like hypnotism to get people to like
Yeah.
believe certain things and concoct these like false memories or these false like places. So
Hmm.
you're right. Domestic violence, but then also addiction. because it goes
Yeah, yeah.
into Maya and her Klonopin addiction, and hers wasn't what's what I'm looking for. Hers was inflicted by others thinking that she needed to be on it, which is interesting. Like the doctors thought that she needed this. And we get this whole story with in the aftermath where she's off of it now. She starts going to AA, but she's like, I don't even know if I'm an alcoholic because she's like ever after like Frank left the equation, she's like, I didn't need alcohol anymore. Okay, one thing that I didn't think that we talked about last time enough of was the cabin itself. And I didn't even notice like you had put these screenshots in our notes last time that I thought were so
Mm,
interesting because I was like reading them in full this time around. And remember your question last time about this like person going out into the woods and building a place to protect themselves felt like a theme before and you like couldn't put your finger on it. And
yeah.
then you were getting these like responses. Where did these come from, by the way? Like were they
I just asked ChatGPT. I was like, can
Oh, it
you
was
help me
ChatGPT.
find this?
Love
Yeah.
it. Because one of the ones was, it felt like a human connection, which is a little scary. Um, One of them mentioned Bridge to Terabithia and The Secret Garden, both doing the same thing.
Hmm.
Both of those books were mentioned in the first half of this book. Like these were
Oh,
books
really?
that Maya liked when she was a child. Like she loved the book Bridge to Terabithia and The Secret Garden. There was also a movie, and I wish I could remember what it was called, something Crystal, because I wonder if that was also had a similar theme where you're creating this like false world in order to cope with the reality of your own. So it's interesting looking back on it now. I didn't pick up on it at the time, but the author was kind of putting these like little seeds of doubt in us at the beginning where like this cabin
Hmm.
didn't really exist. This was created. This was a figment of their imaginations in order to cope with their own realities. So I thought that that was such an interesting thing that ChatGPT referenced these books when they were already referenced in this book.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I didn't realize that at all. Um, I was also like struck by, the idea of the cabin being, the central figure, you know, it's not like in the, what is it in the Bridge to Terabithia? It's like it's entire sort of worlds, right? It's not like one specific place, but in the Secret Garden, it's that garden,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I haven't read the book since I was a child, although I loved it at the time. If I remember right, it's this like little boy and girl. One of them is sick, and there is a bridge in the woods that they have to cross. So there is like a space, like a place that they have to go to. But then once they cross it, they're in a new world. Almost like Chronicles of
Ah,
Narnia. Like remember there's
okay.
the wardrobe that they go into, and then suddenly they're in a new world. Like it was kind of like that, which might have also been referenced in this book. I
Like
can't remember.
Harry Potter too, I guess. You have to like cross it into
True.
it like that. And in this, I mean, yeah, there's that like part of the road that's kind of, all destroyed. So I guess you could see that as
Mm-hmm.
being a bridge that they have to cross to get to the cabin. So that's a really interesting parallel. There's
Mm-hmm.
a little Easter egg in there.
Yeah, I love Easter eggs like that. More of those,
Yeah.
please. I love books that like reference other books and they all kind of are playing off of each other. I think it's such a fun thing to do.
Yeah, it's also interesting, like what you said about, the author sort of planting these seeds, because like the story within a story does that as well, right? So the
Hmm.
story that her Maya's father has started and he hasn't quite finished it, but really in this, the little kid comes down from his I guess it's a village like up in the sky, up in the clouds, and he comes down for an errand and forgets who he is after an accident.
Hmm.
He doesn't know where he came from and sort of um, gets sort of adopted by another family. And it's interesting that that's sort of what's happening, right? Like that is the structure that's happening in Maya's world
Hmm.
too, right? She's sort of forgetting who she is, where she's come from in these moments with Frank, like, and she's sort of being, I mean, not adopted, but sort of brought into this new world with him that only exists when they're together. And then she has to find her way back.
Hmm.
So, and it was kind of a nice touch for at the end. She's like writing the end to her father's story and she's writing him back to his home. And it's like, yeah, it
Hmm.
was a nice parallel. What did you think of that?
I thought it was really sweet, and that was another one of those things where I think that you probably picked up on more than I did because when I was like reading your notes about it, I'm like, oh yeah, you're right, that parallel does exist. Whereas that story within the story was definitely one that I kind of flew through a little bit faster. It definitely heightened what would I think otherwise be more of like a I think sometimes thrillers and suspense books have a tendency to be put aside as not as what's the word I'm looking for? Like book club worthy maybe as some of the other books. But I think that
Yeah.
these are the kinds of things that are interwoven that actually make it like just a really compelling book to read, but then also to talk about, which I love.
Yeah, it has depth. It has a bunch of
Yeah.
layers to it, right? So yeah, I
Hmm.
really do appreciate that. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about like there's this like very feminist ending, I felt,
Hmm.
like the
Hmm.
people who are sort of on her side at the end, like Detective Diaz, um, are and her mother, like they're sort of there to, help her out, even though earlier, the person that got her on Clonopin in the first part,
Yeah.
is sort of um uh juxtaposed, I guess, against some of this too. So what did you think about that? About how, like, maybe I'm just like reading too much into it. I don't think like everyone's sort of gender was apparent for us, but
I do, but I think the important ones were very evident, and I do think that there is that juxtaposition because the first half of Maya's life is absolutely dominated or like under the control of men. Like her mom is there trying to help out, and her mom is just following, what other people are saying. Like the person who put it in Maya's mom's head that Maya might need to see a therapist was the detective, who is a man, and the person who prescribes her the Klonopin is a man, Dr. Barry. And
mhm.
then it's and then Frank is the person whose control she's under all this time. And then it's only in the second half that we now get, her mom's coming to save her. It's not Dan, which I also like. I like how Dan was just kind of this like side character, doesn't really do much, and I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
And like it was her mom that rescues her, which is great. Like I feel like we're so used to seeing like the boyfriend comes in and saves the day, but no, it was the mother, which was really sweet. And
Mhm.
then we do get Detective Diaz in the second half, and she believes her right away. She listens to the voice memo and she's like, leave this with me. I'll build a case. I'll figure it out. And yeah, like I think it's got to be intentional that the author has all these men in the first half that are kind of holding Maya back, and in the second half, it's Maya. And then, obviously Maya's father is like a central figure and a good person in her life, but she's the one who finishes his story. So it's interesting that like the first half is very male dominated, which is, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but like his book, the first half is written by him and the second half is going to be taken over by Maya. I think that's kind of like a cool parallel there, whether it was intentional or not. I like it.
Mhm. Yeah, sometimes when we're talking about these things, I'm like, oh, it'd be cool to have the author here and be like,
I
did you,
know.
like, how
Maybe
did you
one
write
day.
this?
Oh my God, maybe one day.
I'm gonna pick your brain. Tell me, am
I
I
do
reading this how
also
you intended it?
I do also think though that like books are like art in the sense that it's oh, that's did you hear that? That Morty just is losing his mind.
Okay.
Um, I do think that books are like art where I think it's kind of up to the reader to decode it in whatever ways they want, and maybe the author has certain intentions, but at the end of the day, like it's the reader who gets to decide. I always remember there was, I think it was Joyce Carol Oates. I could be wrong, but she had written a bunch of short stories, and there was like, um, about she writes about gray hats a lot, and a
Mhm.
reader was like, I need to know what these symbolize. Like, is it this? Is it that? And she kind of went like, I don't know, like sometimes a gray hat is just a gray hat, or sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, which is another ism. But I think that some things are maybe intentional, some things we're finding, and I don't know. Like I would like to think like if I was an author and people were dissecting it and finding things I never intended, I'd be like, "Oh my God, great, amazing. Like how exciting that you're finding like things that resonate with you that was never intentional." That's what I would imagine, but I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. You're so right. I love that line. Sometimes a gray hat is just a gray hat.
Mm.
Also, you are an author, to be published author
One day,
soon.
hopefully. And then people can pick them apart and find things that I never intended, and it will be very exciting.
We can talk about your book. This is how you
Maybe.
intended it, Heather.
We'll see.
Well,
Oh, should we
well,
end it there? Are we at time?
All right, so for the next one, we're going to read Sally Rooney's Intermezzo. Look how pretty this book is.
I
It's
love
I
the
love this
cover.
check pattern. Um, love Sally Rooney. Rooney. Read Normal People in Conversation with Friends. Both those have been so good. And it says it's an exquisitely moving story about grief, love, and family, but especially love from the global phenomenon, Sally Rooney. So love stories about families. I'm excited to dig into this. So we're thinking, okay, so this is in three parts, looks like. So let's read the first part, which brings us almost halfway. So, just about uh up until chapter 9, I believe. But yeah, part one, and we'll talk about it next time.
Can't wait.
Sounds
See you at book
great.
club.
See you then. Bye.
Bye.